You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 8th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Why the only thing funnier than Donald Trump getting a Nobel Peace Prize is Donald Trump not getting one, why landmines may be coming back into fashion, and why the Swiss are being urged to drink more. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Lynn O'Donnell and Petri Bertsoff will discuss today's big stories, and we'll hear from the author Ali Watkins about her new book, recalling the American connections that armed the IRA. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Lynn O'Donnell, columnist for Foreign Policy magazine and former Kabul bureau chief for AFP, and by Petri Bertsoff, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
Petri, first of all, despite being our Helsinki correspondent, you are not in fact in Helsinki. You are right here in the studio. What are you doing here?
I ask myself that same question. I'm here because of the heat. Helsinki has been super, and all of Finland has been, well, not very surprising, but still very cold for the entire month of June. We're talking plus 15 and rainy. I needed to get some sun, but then lo and behold, the day I arrived, it rained and it was plus 20. So there we go.
But 15 degrees and raining in Finland, that's your cue for like putting out deck chairs and, basking in the overcastness.
They say that, but I need at least 25 degrees to feel summery.
You get a solid 2 days of that a year then.
I know.
I also understand, because we did talk about this beforehand, that you have become quite the authority on potatoes.
That's correct, Andrew. I have. This is because of a recent Monocle story I did about potatoes and this Michelin-starred chef in Helsinki who specializes in potatoes. And he told me everything about potatoes. How much show do we have? I can talk for hours. Let's just say I learned that there are over 1,000 different types of potatoes in the world. Finland has 70 types of potatoes, and you have different potatoes for different types of foods. Annabelle is best for salads, soups, and barbecues, just to give you one tip.
If people do wish to know more about potatoes, where can they read this or hear this?
They can call me up, and I don't charge much.
Lynn, you are going to Paris in August, which is an unusual thing to do because, at least in years when there's not an Olympic Games, August famously is when everybody in Paris leaves it.
Yeah, I love an empty city. So that's one of the reasons that I'm attracted to go. I'm going to visit friends who I haven't seen for a long time, and then they're going off on their holidays, and I have, I'm under great pressure.
So hang on, your friends are leaving just as you arrive.
Exactly. I'm not going to take it personally.
Hi everyone, I'm here.
Bye. Yeah. So they've got cats, I've got a cat, so we'll get the cats together, and I'm going to stick around and enjoy being in Paris.
And well, that will be fun. People who have been listening to us that long will recall that we did 2 entire weeks of the Daily out of Paris about this time last year during the Olympics, and it was glorious. But we will start today in Washington, D.C., and with the latest flowering of what has become a hardy media perennial, i.e. the nomination of US President Donald Trump for the Nobel Prize for Peace. As far too many people, Trump included, either don't know or pretend not to, nomination for the gong is meaningless. Hundreds of people or entities can nominate any Yahoo they like, and very often do. In 1939, one Swedish parliamentarian, attempting to make a satirical point, nominated Adolf Hitler. It remains to be seen whether Trump's case will be helped or hindered by the fact that his nominator is someone presently on the hook on war crimes charges.
I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well-deserved, and you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much. Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, baby.
Again, it would all be tremendously amusing, Lynn, if this wasn't actually happening. But is this just yet another iteration of Trump's fellow world leaders realising that the way to get anywhere with him is just to grovel?
I really cannot think of any other reason. I mean, he's got the plane, he's got the gold-plated plane from the Qataris. The Pakistanis must have been scrambling around, what do we do? What do we give him? He's always going on about the Nobel Peace Prize. Why don't we do that? And Netanyahu as well has shown, I guess, a lack of imagination because he's just copying the Pakistanis. But there is no less flattery in it seems. Yeah.
Petri, he is morbidly obsessed with it. Is it just because Barack Obama has one and he doesn't?
That's probably one of the reasons. But it's so clear that they are just trying to pander to Trump's ego. And didn't he say at some point that it should be named the Trump Peace Prize instead of Nobel Peace? I don't know if that was fake news. Who knows anymore? Stuff about Trump, if it's true or not. He wants to undo everything that the Democrats did, and at the same time, he wants to get the same prizes that a Democrat president received as well. What are the chances? I don't know. I saw on one of the bookmaker sites that he has 28% chance of winning it. I don't think so.
I would be riveted to know what odds that bookmaker is offering.
I'd take it.
Lynn, just let's have a bit of fun here. Is there actually any kind of case to be made for him? I mean, the basis for his claims, other than that he's just Donald Trump and he should just get all the prizes for being Donald Trump, would be the Abraham Accords, which during his first term he did do something to bring about. This is the reconciliation of Israel with certain of its Arab neighbours. He has more recently sought to claim credit for ending what he tried to brand the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, the recent punch-up between Pakistan and India, and the conclusion of what does appear to be an actual peace agreement between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The latter one in particular, I would be willing to concede, is not nothing.
I don't think any of it is nothing, especially the Abraham Accords. If they'd stuck, it would have been an incredibly impressive historic achievement. But then you've got to balance it out. If you've got the pros and the cons, the deal that he did with the Taliban, for instance, to end the war in Afghanistan, put the Taliban back in power. Mm-hmm. And Netanyahu, the one who has today, the latest nomination, is facing an arrest warrant, an ICC arrest warrant for war crimes. The Taliban today, two of their leaders have been targeted with arrest warrants Indeed. For crimes against humanity. I mean, we're not talking about a cohort of people who are that have integrity at the core of their being. It's like, this is all just ticking off. And, Barack Obama did get it in, 2010 or 11?
I think it was even earlier than that. It was basically a housewarming present.
Yes, but it was after he had announced a surge of 40,000 troops to Afghanistan. So it's not like you are the embodiment of peace like we expect in, let's say, a pope, and you get it. You get it because, I don't know, more people vote yes than no when it comes down to it. So, I would actually take a bet that he will get it.
Petri, the next thing that he will try to gracelessly advance as a reason he should have it, and I do rather think that one of the likeliest reasons he won't get it is that he just keeps banging on and on and on about wanting one. But if there is any kind of ceasefire concluded between Israel and whatever remains of Hamas, he will, of course, take all the credit for that. But do we actually think that looks any more likely than it has at any point in the last? We are coming up for 2 years of this.
That's a really good question. Again, if we look at what happened with the previous ceasefire and how it held and then how it didn't hold, and how it didn't address any of the root causes of this conflict. As someone who has studied peacemaking quite a lot, conflicts, there can be ceasefires, but if you don't look at the underlying causes for conflict, can you then be sort of championed as a peacemaker? Yes, he can maybe pull off, at least he can take credit for a ceasefire, but then, what if the conflict erupts again in a couple of times? And I think the same applies to also what he's doing, what he said he achieved with Iran. I don't think policy experts are agree that this was the lasting solution to Iran's nuclear ambitions. Some people would argue that actually, well, now the lesson is to all aspiring nuclear countries that, hey, you need to do it faster because otherwise, this is what happens. So I think a lot of his so-called achievements are problematic if you take the long view of things.
Just finally on this one, Lynn, and focusing back on Gaza, do we yet have any clear idea of how and when Israel thinks this should end? The latest development is that the Defence Minister, Israel Katz, is floating this idea of building what he's calling a humanitarian city on the outskirts of whatever is left of Rafah, which will house 600,000 people initially and eventually everyone in Gaza, which is a tick over 2 million people. He is also claiming that they will not be allowed to leave. But this is a question that people are going to have to apprehend at some point, because I'm sure among the 2 million people left in Gaza, there are a great many of them who do want to leave. And the question that people are going to have to answer at some point is, well, if they want to go, why shouldn't they?
Well, indeed. Freedom of movement, freedom, full stop. I think that it probably comes down to what Donald Trump allows the Israeli government to do. As we know, Netanyahu's government is not popular with Israeli people. They just want this over. But if we're focusing on the people of Gaza, God almighty, what is there to stay for? What we've seen has been a horrendous destruction of their home and their homes. But the two sides, Hamas and Israel, Netanyahu's Israel, are, it seems to me, entrenched, almost irreparably entrenched in their positions. We won't leave until Hamas is destroyed. Well, we're not leaving. We're not going to honour a ceasefire until the Israeli forces pull out. There's no middle ground in that. So I think that there has to be an outside cracker of heads, and that comes down again to the personality and the whims of Donald Trump. As we know, he wants a peace prize, so maybe he'll make it work. But how you make that work, I don't know. You've got a terrorist organisation that is using a destroyed population as human shields, and you've got a very developed military force that is determined to wage modern style war in what is now rubble. It is just it's just the worst possible situation that you could describe. So what was the question? How does it end? I've got no idea, but nor does anybody else.
Well, in further heartwarming developments, let's look now at the accelerating fraying of the Ottawa Treaty, which, when it was signed in 1997, looked like a heartening demonstration of post-Cold War progress. The aim of the Ottawa Treaty was to eliminate anti-personnel mines on the grounds that they are imprecise when deployed, as you cannot be certain who will drive over or tread on one, and dangerous long afterwards. In Laos, for example, where no such weapon has been planted since the Vietnam War ended 50 years ago, 5 people were killed and 3 injured by mines as recently as 2023. At its peak, 165 countries had signed the Ottawa Treaty, including Ukraine, which is now out, along with Finland, Poland and the Baltic states, all for the same obvious reason. Petri, has this been controversial in Finland at all?
Not really. It passed a couple of weeks ago in a vote in the Finnish parliament. I think, 90% of the MPs in favor, even the opposition MPs in favor of it. There are so many layers to this story. One argument that was made quite often in the public debate that preceded the vote in Finland was that mines themselves have developed a lot. Since the Ottawa Treaty. By the way, Finland was the last EU country to sign it in 2011 and destroyed over 1 million mines as a result. Nowadays, similar landmines can be made using technology that enables demining in a much more efficient way as before, just to name one of the advances. And then an interesting aspect of the debate was also the fact that Finland has completely replaced the old landmines with new kinds of technologies. So in a sense, they don't have a need for these landmines anymore. But since the security situation is what it is, and Finland has 1,340 kilometers of land border with Russia, there's no reason for Finland to be in this treaty anymore. But as said, there are alternative technologies.
For Ukraine, Lynn, this is just them, or as they would see it, answering what Russia has done in Ukraine. Russia has planted uncountable numbers of landmines in the last 3 years, in particular in Ukraine. There are some suggestions that one of the reasons that last summer's much vaunted counter-offensive by Ukraine stalled was due to the minefields the Russians have laid. And there are suggestions that by Ukraine planting its own minefields, that may be its best chance of holding the lines it has. Is this just one of those trade-offs that war necessitates, where you just think, OK, this is not a thing I'm going to enjoy doing, but it is a thing we have to do?
Oh, the thing we have to do is put little bits of metal in the ground that when kiddies step on them will explode and blow their legs off. I mean, for God's sake. I think of landmines as the most evil invention in history. The most people who die from landmine injuries are children. Anywhere in the world, in Iraq, in northern Iraq, I've visited hospitals where kiddies have lost their legs while, herding the sheep, for God's sake. In Afghanistan, I've been on minefields with deminers while they're beeping, looking for these damn things, The Soviets dropped them all over Afghanistan and during the 80s, and they looked like toys. They were made to look like toys. What evil is that? So I don't give a damn what the reason is. I really don't care what excuse you're going to give me, how long your border is, how internecine your war seems. No, just no to landmines.
Hey, Petri, were those arguments made in Finland?
No. They how should I put it? The public debate ever since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has completely shifted in Finland. Great majority of Finns, as you know, were against NATO, and now great majority of Finns are for NATO. And everything to do with Russia has just been turned upside down. So stuff that was, pulling out of actually signing the Ottawa Convention, then when it happened, that was there was a big debate, but it was still majority of population supported it. The public opinion has been turned completely upside down in this situation. And no, that was not. Obviously you do have peace organizations, but their voices are not. It's a very militaristic sort of debate, and the voices that we hear in Finland today.
I mean, Lynn, beyond the dangers you mentioned, and I have seen similar things myself in hospitals in Bosnia in particular, where the Serbs planted mines, but they planted them in snow, which of course melts and turns into water, which moves mines down hills and into fields, and nobody knows where they are anymore until people drive a tractor over them or tread on it, or, as you suggest, pick it up and try to play with it. But is there a possible strategic trap here for Ukraine as well, in that if it does create some sort of equivalent to Korea's demilitarized zone, which is probably, I think, the most heavily mined area on Earth, then they sort of pre-solidify the idea of a partition of their country?
Yes, well, it's upping the ante no matter how you look at it. And yes, yeah, I guess so. I don't really know what more to say about that. You militarise a border, it's very hard to demilitarise the border. That's just the nature of these things, I cannot get my head around justification tactically or strategically of reintroducing landmines.
Well, to Mexico City now, or not, as seems to be the preference of a small but voluble cohort. There have been protests, some of them quite violent, against foreign tourists, foreign businesses and foreign digital nomads. Among the demands of the protesters are that incomers pay taxes, learn to speak the language and adapt to Mexican culture. It seems sadly unlikely that the Mexican protesters seething against foreigners are engaged in a live-action satirical commentary on Trumpism. Rather, they They are vexed that Airbnbers and remote workers in particular have driven rents beyond the reach of locals. Mexico's President, Claudia Sheinbaum, a former mayor of Mexico City, has condemned what she described as xenophobic behaviour. Petri, it would be awful, foreigners coming to your country and taking over all your current affairs podcasts.
Absolutely. I hope that never happens, such as Australians moving to the UK.
Exactly. It would be awful. Or Finns on British radio. It would be dreadful. Do we think, though, the protesters have any kind of a case at all?
I think they do have a case, and I say this as someone who's lived in Rome for many years previously. I would say, though, that the protests are not per se about tourism. They're about the effects of tourism. I don't think anybody in Venice or Rome really wants the tourists to go. Venice without tourists, what would be left, really? Beautiful buildings,
Very
but
nice.
Yeah, true, in a way. But I mean, there's no industry left there anymore. They really depend on tourism. But if you look at the effects over tourism, if the city is if they lose the local flair, if local people cannot afford rents, cannot afford to eat in the restaurants anymore, if they sort of become this Disneylands, like you could argue that Venice in fact has become, they have a case. But again, going back to the root cases, it's not tourism that is the evil here. It's the effects of tourism, and I think the city administrations should look at addressing some of those. I mean, you can introduce affordable housing without ending tourism, for example. I mean, easy for me to say, but you get my point.
It's not just tourism, though, Leonard. It is people moving to Mexico City because it is, and especially Americans moving to Mexico City because it is cheaper than America. And the thing is, if you take at face value, if not the methods, then the complaints of these protesters that these foreigners are coming over here and they don't speak the language and they don't blend in and they're taking all our jobs and our homes, do you then have to concur that the xenophobic populists north of the border might not also have a point?
Yeah, that's what I thought when I read the story. But the president, when she was mayor of Mexico City, did a deal with Airbnb without looking ahead to see what the economic impacts would be. But I think here in London, we have seen the impact of, money laundering in high-end property, then middle-end property, and the impact that it's had on property prices, driving ordinary Londoners out of their own market. And so I do think that they have a point. I don't think that it's xenophobia, and I think it's a cheap shot by her to call it xenophobia. I think what they would like to do is protect what they have and not be driven out of their homes. And I can see that maybe that is happening. It has happened, did happen in London until, the Russian money laundering was dealt with after the invasion of Ukraine to an extent. I mean, I live in central London and I walked around during COVID, and a lot, where I live near Belgravia, Kensington, Knightsbridge, over that away, a lot of the property was empty because it's not owned by people who live in it. It's owned to either come in very temporarily or as a way of parking cash. And I realise this is different, but what I'm talking about is, the people not respecting the impact that their investment in the real estate of a neighbourhood can have on the people who call it home.
I mean, is there going to come a point then, Petri, do you think, for some cities, perhaps Mexico City being one of them, perhaps some of those others you mentioned, which are popular with digital nomads in particular? I know this has been a thing in Lisbon as well, in particular, which is a delightful city with, which is in the EU and it's in a really convenient time zone and really incredibly tempting for all sorts of reasons. But might governments find themselves compelled? I mean, there will be nerves around it because you don't want to end up sounding like these xenophobic, tub-thumping populists, but might more strict measures have to be taken about who is entitled to live in a particular place?
That's a tough one. Like, how do you achieve it? I mean, can you put quotas on how many?
Didn't say it was easy.
But sort of you cannot put gates around your city and say, okay, you are allowed in, you're not. I'm sure things can be done. Apartment building where I live in Helsinki, we have we don't allow Airbnb apartments at all, and housing societies they can legislate. I'm sure, and you can have tourist taxes and stuff, things like that. But at the end of the day, you can't just stop people at the city borders. You can incentivize them to go somewhere else, but it's a slippery slope because tourism brings in a lot of money as well. I guess it's about finding a balance. Cities don't want to lose their souls. They want to be good cities for the locals as well, but also welcoming to tourists.
Well, regular listeners to The Daily, like there are any other kind, etc., will recall that on one episode of our recent run of shows from Monocle's Zurich studio, we discussed Swiss wine with no less a figure than Chandra Kurt, editor of Weinzeller, and you don't need to speak Swiss to know what that means. The head of Switzerland's Department of Economic Affairs, Federal Councillor Guy Parmelin, who may be either or both a Weinzeller reader and daily listener, has urged his fellow citizens to drink more of the local plonk, hoping to bolster Switzerland's ailing wine business. This has gotten him yelled at a bit by people who believe that such carousing should not be encouraged, and also by people who've noted that he owns a vineyard. But Lynn, it is a global phenomenon, the tapering off of wine consumption, but especially in Switzerland, it is down 8% in the last year and 16% when we're just talking about Swiss wines. On the one hand, this is bad for Swiss wines, but is this a public health triumph if we assume that the people who used to drink wine haven't taken up huffing petrol instead?
I don't think they've taken up sniffing petrol. I think they've taken up cocaine, methamphetamine, cannabis. I think that if you look at the consumption figures for illicit drugs, you'll find that they've gone up probably by the same rate as consumption of wine has gone down. So if our authorities, including this wine vineyard-owning parliamentarian, really want people to drink more wine, maybe they should do something about dealing with the illicit manner of getting off your face.
There is also a problem, I think, when you're trying to sell anything in Switzerland, even Swiss made in Switzerland, Petri, that everything in Switzerland is unbelievably expensive. And it is probably still cheaper just to buy stuff from France or Italy or Germany, all of which is perfectly drinkable.
That is absolutely correct. And I have to point out that I have actually done a Monocle story on Swiss wines. Oh, the stuff that I have to do in this line of work. And Swiss wine is amazing, but I seem to recall that a very small percentage of it is actually exported.
1%.
Exactly. So maybe they could do something. Maybe they could try to export more of their wines. And then, this comes from my heart as a Finn, if you want people to drink more, make it cheaper. That's why we go to Tallinn to buy our booze.
Is there, though, a branding issue, though, Lynn, in that people don't automatically equate Switzerland with wine in the same way that they don't perhaps automatically equate Italy with cuckoo clocks or Germany with cheese with holes in it? Do they need to rethink how it's sold?
Oh, yeah, maybe. I mean, I've been to Switzerland a few times. I've had wine, but what are those things called where you melt loads of cheese? Fondue. Okay, so what you do is you go there and you have a fondue and you dip stuff in the molten cheese and eat it, and then you wash it down with cold white wine and it solidifies in your stomach, and you're stuck like that for a couple of days.
I'm not sure.
I'm never going to do that again.
I don't think in the ad copy I would use phrases like solidifies in your stomach.
Exactly. So you have to go there and you find it and you say, I'm never going to do that again. So maybe if they had a better cuisine or a better way of attracting people into their restaurants, or, as you said, make it cheaper. Because, people that I have visited in Switzerland, as you said, Andrew, drive to France to buy their booze.
Is there possibly, though, Lynn, a lesson here in encouraging people to try something new from our own country? Because there was a period in which Australian wine was a literal punchline in British comedy. You only had to say Australian wine and people would fall about laughing. Now in the United Kingdom, it is the market leader by volume.
Of course, yeah.
And so it should be. It's great.
It's great, yes. And it's affordable. The big wine producers make wine for an export market.
So basically that's it. It just has to be affordable. Petri, are the Finns big wine drinkers as such?
We're big drinkers of anything that has alcohol in it. Wine consumption is going up. I believe, I hope I'm not giving you wrong stats, or maybe it's going down less than the consumption of other alcohol. But I know that the culture is changing. I mean, I remember when I was young, we drank moonshine. You know, young people today, if they drink wine. So as a representative of Generation X, you know, I've done my part.
Petri Burtsoff and Lynn O'Donnell, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, 50 years ago, give or take a few months, the New York Times bemusedly reported the discovery by local police that shipments of American-supplied rifles and explosives for the Irish Republican Army were being smuggled across the Atlantic aboard, of all vessels, the Queen Elizabeth II. The QE2 connection was one of many ingenious means by which American sympathisers enabled the IRA's campaigns of the 1970s. In particular, a gang of Irish Americans who became known, upon their indictment later in 1975, as the Philadelphia Five. Their story is recalled in a new book by Ali Watkins. The next one is For You, a true story of guns, country and the IRA's American Army. I spoke to Ali earlier and began by asking where her interest in the Philadelphia Five had begun.
Yeah, indeed. I've told many friends you should not write a book unless you'd want to do it for free because it takes too long and is way too much work. This one was really kind of a passion project for me. You know, like many second and third generation Irish Americans, I had a kind of shadowy relative in my past who had wound up in America under strange circumstances after the 1920s. I grew up in an Irish American family. There had always been rumors that my great grandfather had served in the IRA during the War of Independence and then the Civil War and had landed in Philadelphia after that. So I had always kind of dug into that just as a side project for me personally. And then over the COVID pandemic, I just had a little bit more time. And so I was digging a little more into that, thinking about if I wanted to write something about it or just what I could do with it. And it was in the course of researching his background, because, you know, it was so interesting to me about his story and what ultimately led to the book was the fact that he landed in Philadelphia. And, you know, when you're thinking of Irish America, you think of Boston, you think of New York, you know, you don't often think of Philly. So I was just kind of researching the Irish diaspora in Philadelphia. And through that, I kind of stumbled on this little known gun trafficking case that involved several Irish Americans from my family's old neighborhood in Philly, where they're basically accused of sending hundreds of American rifles into the North at the height of the Troubles. It was just sort of unspooled from there, you know, and through that case, crime reporter by trade and investigative reporter by trade. So like I could kind of build a story around that criminal case. And through it, there was a way to tell a story, I think, about Irish America that hadn't really been told yet, you know?
Because I think it was understood in the United Kingdom during the Troubles that there was sympathy for the IRA in the United States, that NORAID, the US organization to raise money for Northern Ireland, was an ill-disguised front for IRA fundraising and indeed gun running. But how big a thing was it? Like, how important to the IRA was the US connection in general and the Philadelphia connection in particular?
I've thought a lot about this just because obviously the Troubles, we're talking about 30 years, right? And so when we're talking about how significant this story was and this moment was, I think what does make it so important and so critical to the broader scope of the conflict, you know, this moment in Irish America was short-lived. You know, it lasts from like 1970 to 1975 when we're talking about NORAID, talking about really active Irish American support for the IRA. But what's so significant about it, what's significant about this Philadelphia case, that case and a couple others around it sent hundreds of American rifles into Belfast and Derry, many of them American Armalites. And when you think about that amount of guns at that specific time, you know, we're talking about the moment when the provisional IRA is kind of on its very wobbly first legs. It's unclear whether it's going to survive, you know, various wars and you know, internal struggles and the British Army and all of these things. And, you know, then suddenly you have this consistent influx of high-powered weaponry. And I do think, you know, it's hard to say what the provisional IRA might have become without that injection of American guns at that time. And, you know, the Philadelphia cell did send the most guns at that moment by a long stretch.
And extraordinarily, in one bleakly comic detail, they managed to smuggle some of them aboard the Queen Elizabeth II of all craft they could have chosen, an irony which I'm sure appealed to them. But a big part of the book is that you do the journalist's thing of telling a big story by trying to tell a small story. You isolate the narrative to one particular rifle, which was fired in identifiable circumstances circumstances by one particular IRA volunteer, although not with any great success from her part. But this is Geraldine Crawford, who you don't get to speak to for the book. She declines to participate. Do you know if she's read it or if she plans to?
I don't. And, I think like the experience of including her, this book was as much a professional journey as a personal journey for me, especially as an American. Whenever you're an American coming here and writing about this subject, you have to be aware of certain things and you have to sort of know where you're at. But, the reason I ultimately decided to include her story is one, we did have documentation of what had happened through public records, through other interviews she had given. But you said earlier there was always kind of this general consensus or general understanding, both here and in America, I think, that American guns went into the North and that there was a lot of Irish American support for the provisional IRA. But those broader understandings always kind of lack critical details, especially from Irish America. And I think it's what's kind of allowed us to romanticize that conflict often. So being able to put a gun in someone like Geraldine Crawford's hands and to be able to sort of show that stark dichotomy between Irish Americans who weren't necessarily directly involved in the conflict and the teenage IRA fighters who eventually had to deal with the consequences. There's something I think quite powerful about that from a story perspective.
A theme of the book are the attempts eventually successful to prosecute the Philadelphia Five, and that opens up a whole other can of worms, which was the transatlantic politics between the United States and the United Kingdom, as the UK was well aware that a war was being fought against their forces in the North by guns run out of America. How fraught did relations between Washington and London get during that period?
One of the most interesting pieces of reporting in the book was actually there's a packet of papers at the British Archives in Kew Gardens that has a lot of these kind of nuts and bolts conversations between, we're not talking high level, like ministerial level. We're talking like RUC investigators sending notes to American prosecutors, trying to square both countries' criminal principles, how to write an indictment, what the British want the indictment to say, what the Americans can say in the indictment. So there was definitely a lot of frustration from the British perspective of there was actually some really interesting discontent because the British investigators didn't feel like American prosecutors understood just how sensitive things were in the. And, American prosecutors are asking for evidence and asking for details that British investigators are kind of like, I don't know if we want that in court. So it's really interesting to see those pieces kind of move in real time as you're looking at the dispatches between the two. But America has always been in this weird place with Northern Ireland, right? And obviously they're remembered for kind of the 1990s, George Mitchell navigating the Good Friday Agreement. But for a very long time, America really preferred to not make Northern Ireland its problem, right? And it sticks them in a very awkward position politically for a very long time.
That was Ali Watkins. Her new book, The Next One Is For You, a true story of guns, country and the IRA's American Army, is available now. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Lynn O'Donnell and Petri Bertsoff. The show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Henry King. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.